Welcome to this 6th presentation in the first annual Contemporary Thoughts on Servant Leadership speaker series. Brought to you by Servant Leadership Theory and Practice. I was just going to hold this up. Brought to you by Servant Leadership Theory and Practice and the Turner College's MSOL program. Tonight we have the President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Infantry Museum and Soldier Center, Greg Camp. But I'm going to have one of my students, Eric, who is a captain in the Army, introduce Greg for us.
All right, thank you, Dr. Phil. All right, I'd like to introduce Colonel Retired Greg Camp. He was commissioned as a Second Lieutenant of Infantry from West Point in 1968. He served as a rifle platoon leader and company commander in the 1st Cav Division in Vietnam from 1969 to 1970. During his career, he commanded at the company, battalion, and brigade levels. His staff assignments included battalion, brigade, and division level positions in personnel and operations. His last assignment was as Chief of Staff of the United States Army Infantry Center at Fort Benning. His awards include the Legion of Merit with 2 oak leaf clusters, the Bronze Star with Valor and 2 oak leaf clusters, the Air Medal with oak leaf cluster, the Army Commendation Medal with Valor and oak leaf cluster, and the Vietnamese Cross of Gallantry with bronze palm. He is an airborne ranger. After retiring from the Army, he was a senior vice president with Columbus Bank and Trust Company, and later a senior director with Total Systems Services. In 2002, he became the executive vice president of the National Infantry Foundation and continues his service there as president and CEO. He is a member of St. Anne's Catholic Church. In 2013, he was elected and became the 2014 Rotary Club president for Columbus, Georgia. He is married to the former Joan Gipp of Atlanta, Georgia, and they have 3 adult children and 3 grandchildren. Please join me in welcoming Colonel Retired Greg Camp.
Thanks. Thank you. Well, thank you for that very lengthy but much appreciated introduction. And Sebastian, one of my Rotary buddies, is here. He's our GRSP student. I don't know if you know what that is, but our Rotary Club sponsors a Rotary student every year. And Sebastian and I have lunch every Wednesday together, and he's done a great job. He's from Columbia originally. And I see some other familiar faces out here from some of my previous jobs. And I know that there's some fellow veterans in the crowd. If you're a veteran, please stand up. Come on, stand up, stand up, stand up, stand up. Come on. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to talk quite a bit about my experiences in the Army, and I'm glad I've got 4 or 5 people here to keep me honest. You know, the difference between a fairy tale and a war story. Do you know what that is? A fairy tale starts out as once upon a time. And a war story starts out as, excuse my French, this is no bullshit. Other than that, they're the same. So Dr. Phil asked me to speak to you all in this course a while back in the fall. And at the time, I really didn't know who else would be speaking to you. I didn't really know what the subject was. I knew the subject of the course, but I didn't know what subjects would be available. And I met with him and Danielle earlier this week, I guess, actually. And they let me see a video of one of your previous speakers, Joe Hiroshi. And it was fascinating. I mean, I watched the entire presentation. He was incredible. He clearly lives and breathes the subject matter. It's part of his job, actually. He works in a center of selfless service and servant leadership. And he's worked for one of the foremost authors in that subject matter. And so he spoke to you eloquently. He had a PowerPoint presentation, but he only used that to collect his thoughts and keep on track. And then I thought, well, I'm teaching an academic course here to folks that are in graduate school, and I guess we have some undergraduates here as well. So, the thought was that this must be an academic presentation. And while I have a couple of references that are academic, one was a Ken Blanchard book that we actually used when I was at TSIS. One of the really neat things we did when I was at Synovus we would study various different leadership books. The whole company or the whole leadership team at Synovus would do that. And we had a book from Ken Blanchard that talked about the subject matter. And the subject matter that I'm talking to you about today is Upending the Pyramid, what it means and how it works. And in preparation for this, I read another book more recently by Dr. Marilyn Jacobson on that same subject, same title. And it's just a more contemporary book, but a lot of the tenets of what it means are the same. But what I'm going to do is probably quite a bit different from what Joe did because you know, I can't speak to you in an academic way like he did. I don't have that depth of knowledge that he did. If you had asked me to come here and talk to you about the Infantry Museum, I could do that, maybe not as good as he did it, but I would do it in the same manner that he did. I could talk to you for as long as you want. In fact, my wife says, don't even get him started. And so, but what I am going to do is a little different. I'm going to tell you, first of all, a little bit more about me, and I can't believe I'm going to say that given that unbelievable introduction, but I'm going to go into a little bit more depth about those three careers that I feel like I've had, because I'm going to point out some things in those careers as part of this presentation. So let me talk about my first career, the first part of my life anyway, the first 50 years of my life. I was an Army brat. My dad was in the Army. He was actually an anti-aircraft gun sergeant at Pearl Harbor when it was bombed, and stayed in the Army for 33 years and retired as a colonel after I had already joined the Army. So I was a captain in the Army by the time he retired, and I always wanted to be like my dad. So joining the Army was an easy choice for me. Unlike my dad, I had a really good upbringing, so I had much more opportunities than he did. So I was able to go to West Point, as it was pointed out, and graduated in 1968 in the height of the Vietnam War. I think for most of you in here, and sometimes it's hard for me to realize this, for anybody who's got a little age on them, that the Vietnam War is history to you, more so than World War II was to me when I was growing up. I mean, so I know that I may say some things here about the Vietnam War, thinking that you know more about it than you do, and if I do, just raise your hand, call me out, and I'll try to explain it to you. So I graduated in the middle of the Vietnam War, served in Vietnam, stayed in the Army almost 30 years, and then retired here in Columbus. So the first part that I'm going to talk to you about is about how I saw some of upending the pyramid work in the Army. The second career I had was at Synovus, both CB&T and TSIS, both were within the Synovus community. Now, when you get out of the Army, you really have two choices to make. One is, do you want to go to the job? Is there a job, whether it's a high-paying job or one that you're just fascinated with, and you go chase that job and find out where you can get hired to do that job? Or do you want to go to a place? You know, is there some place you want to be after you get out? And for me, during the 5 years that I was at Fort Benning before I retired from the Army, I literally fell in love with Columbus. So I decided that I wanted to stay in Columbus, and I didn't particularly have a job in mind. I just wanted to get a job. And fortunately, I'd made some contacts with people at Fort Benning, so I was hired to work at the bank, and Janelle and I actually worked at the bank. I just saw Janelle, I hadn't seen her in a while, but we worked at the bank together back in the late 90s after I retired from the Army. And I will talk to you about that experience as well. So I spent about 6 years in what I would call the corporate world at Synovus. And then when this idea of a new infantry museum came up, a vision, if you will, of a new infantry museum, that was really, it was a vision that was begun by the good people in Columbus. It wasn't something that us retirees thought this would be a good idea to have. It was something that the good people in Columbus said, we really are proud of being a neighbor to Fort Benning. And so let's do something to honor those soldiers. And at the same time, let's create a facility that will be so grand that if I say to you all, Cooperstown, New York, how many people know where Cooperstown, New York is or know about Cooperstown, New York? Really? I'm surprised. Well, Cooperstown, New York is the home of the Baseball Hall of Fame. And many people know where that is only because there's a facility that's located there. I'm going to have to try a new one. I thought I'd get more hands on that one. But anyway, so the good folks in Columbus wanted to make sure that they were going to honor their neighbors at Fort Benning that had been serving here for almost 100 years, and at the same time create a place that people would want to come to. So I decided that sounded really, really neat, and given my background in the Army, I decided that I would leave the corporate world and I would go join this nonprofit world. So I went and joined the nonprofit world, and that's where I am today. So what I'm going to try to do, rather than talk to you about academically what upending the pyramid means, I'm going to try to tell you how I have seen it work, at least in phases, parts, pieces, maybe not perfectly, in all three of those careers. So, first of all, what does it mean to upend the pyramid? You know, the traditional hierarchy form of leadership is called command and control. And it has the leader at the top of the organization and then successive levels of subordinates, and at the bottom of the organization are the workers. Now, I was offered a chance to do a PowerPoint and I turned it down, so this is my one PowerPoint I would have had. That's the traditional pyramid, like that. So the leader's up here at the top, and then you have levels of subordinates here, and at the bottom are the workers. So all the workers and the other levels of subordinates are working to make the boss successful. You know, and that command and control structure is the norm, or has been the norm, you know, in corporate world and so forth for many, many years. And then the idea of upending the pyramid, clearly, is you turn that pyramid upside down. And so now the boss is down here, and the levels of leadership above him lead to the top of the pyramid, which are the workers. And the workers are the ones are where the rubber meets the road, if you will. They're the ones, excuse me, that make it happen. So the idea is that all those people are in support of the worker. They're all in support of the person that makes this happen. So that's sort of the definition of it. And then the question is, how does it work? Well, I'm going to talk to you first about the Army. And in the Army, leaders are taught from day one, even as you enter a stream to become a leader, even before you're a leader. When I was at West Point, when you were in ROTC, if you're a young specialist, one step up from a private, and you're getting ready to go to the primary leadership development course, leaders, even before they become leaders, even before they get a chance to lead soldiers, they're taught that leaders do two things. They do two things. They accomplish the mission, and they take care of their troops. And it's not an either or. It's a both. You accomplish the mission, and you take care of your troops. So you might ask, well, how does that work if you're going to go into combat? You know, if you're going to go into combat where there's a high likelihood that maybe some of your troops are going to get killed. You know, how is that taking care of your troops? And so what I would tell you is that the ultimate form of taking care of your troops is to train them, beyond belief so that they can deal with any situation that they're confronted with. Now, in this book that Dr. Phil gave me the other night, there's a great article in here that's probably much more articulate than what I'll be able to do tonight, called Gung Ho, and it's about a Marine lieutenant colonel who commanded a Raider battalion in World War II, but it's all about what I'm talking about. It's all about the idea that the important thing that you do is you train your troops, you train your subordinate leaders, you train all of those people that are where the rubber meets the road, so that they can deal with whatever it is that they're confronted with. But it's more than even just training, because a leader also in the military shares the hardships. It shares the culture. Have any of you all ever seen the movie We Were Soldiers? It was actually partly filmed here. You know, there's one scene in there that I really, many scenes I really like, but one of them, you got Hal Moore is played by Mel Gibson, and he's briefing the soldiers on the field and the families in the stadium behind him before they go up to Vietnam to go into combat. And he says to them, he says, you know, be sure to know that I will be the first one to put my foot on the battlefield and the last one to leave. Now think about that for a minute. You know, if you're the first one on the battlefield, there is nobody there to protect. You don't have a wingman. You're the first guy there. You're the most vulnerable guy there. After that, there'll be more and more and more support. You have more and more comfort. Comfort comes with having other guys, other soldiers in and around where you are. And likewise, if you're the last one off the field, then that also has the same degree of discomfort that you'd have. But that is what leaders are taught. It's what leaders do. In the military, I would tell you that any leader worth his salt would do that without even thinking about it. And that's because that's what they're taught as leaders before they even become leaders. You know, if you look in the military, the leader is the last one to eat. I mean, in particularly if you're in the field, particularly if you're at combat, one of the few joys of life is eating. And so if the chow comes out to the field, you will find all the soldiers will go eat. So if you run out of chow, the soldiers are going to get fed, but the leaders might not get fed. It's a shared hardship, and that shared hardship demonstrates to the soldiers, you know, that they are valued, and demonstrates to the soldiers that their leaders understand that they are where the rubber meets the road. And the other thing about developing subordinates in the military is it's really a necessity. It's not very often, you know, that somebody who runs the mailroom today will be the CEO tomorrow. But in combat, that could happen very easily, where leaders are killed or wounded, and subordinates have to take over. And the military is replete with examples of young leaders who have come in and done incredible things because they were taught to do that, because they were trained to do that. One of the examples that I like to talk about, because it's also one of the features in our museum, is the battle to take Pointe du Hoc. Now, Pointe du Hoc was a cliff that overlooked the beaches on the landings at Normandy. And it actually overlooks both Omaha Beach and Utah Beach, which were the two beaches where our troops were landing. And it was this high point there. And the Rangers, the 2nd Ranger Battalion, got the mission to scale the cliffs and to take out the gun positions that were at the top. There were some artillery pieces, machine guns, mortars, and so forth that were on top of the cliff, and they could wreak havoc on the landing craft as we were trying to land on Normandy. And so the Rangers had to send grappling hooks up to get to the top of the cliff. Now, when they got to the top of the cliff, what they found was that the guns had moved. The artillery barrage, the Air Force's pre-dawn strikes had caused them to move their artillery pieces. So one thought would be, my job was to get to the top of the cliff. Let me set up a perimeter here and wait till somebody else comes and relieves me. But it was not the mentality of the Rangers, nor of our soldiers today. They went after the guns. They said, the guns aren't here. I was going up to the top of the cliff, not so I could sit on the high ground, but so I could take out the guns that would inflict damage on my soldiers. And so they went after the guns, and they found the guns, and they took them all out. But they started with 225 men, and they finished with 90. So the men that took out the guns weren't the leaders that started this day. They were a different set of leaders that took out the guns. But they all knew why they were doing it and what they were doing. And that's part of this upending the pyramid. You know, the people who are interfacing with the public, if it's in a company, or in this case, soldiers that are at the front lines, they've got to know not only what they're doing, but why they're doing it. And in this case, it was very successful. And I'm going to tell you another story. This story is a little controversial. And I was talking to a couple of my veteran buddies here, and they may not even believe this, but this is an article that was in Life magazine back in 1971. This was towards the end of the Vietnam War, and it's about a company in the 1st Cav Division, and the company commander and his relationship with his soldiers. And it speaks to this idea of upending the pyramid to accomplish your task, your mission, and being flexible in doing so. Now, the Army, you probably wouldn't think is one of these organizations that's sort of touchy-feely. Let's talk to the troops and find out what they think about this mission. The Army has a command and control. Army, you talk about command and control structure. The Army even talks about command and control. In Vietnam, the battalion commander would fly above you in a helicopter and the helicopter was called the command and control helicopter. So the hierarchy, you would think, would be very strict, leader at the top, subordinates, and so forth. But by 1971, when this article was written, the country had pretty much given up on winning the Vietnam War. The protests in the United States were so great that really the leaders of our country were looking for an exit strategy. There was no longer any interest or emphasis on a winning strategy. Let's just figure out how can we get out of this conflict gracefully. Yet at the same time, we were drafting young soldiers and sending them to Vietnam to fight an enemy that they didn't necessarily feel any angst against. And then you have a professional officer corps and non-commissioned officer corps who are commanding these soldiers in this situation. And so what this article talks about is the fact that the company commander actually had to essentially negotiate with his soldiers on what missions they would and wouldn't do. Now, that seems just absolutely alien, and I'm sure that as we look back on our Army today, that would be court-martial sort of material. But what it reflects is the fact that the mission was still there. The leaders had to accomplish the mission. And they were really given two choices. They could either accomplish the mission the way they did, or the soldiers would revolt. And the soldiers really didn't care if they got court-martialed. I mean, and some of the veterans here may have experienced something similar, but in those days, the idea that you got court-martialed meant that you went back to a rear base and you went into a jail that had a bed and 3 hot meals, or you could stay in the field where you might get killed. And given their lack of interest in the war, based on the lack of interest in winning the war, the decision was that we're going to continue to accomplish the mission, but we're going to do it in a unorthodox and very controversial way. And lastly, when it comes to Army, when the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, and the former Soviet bloc countries became free of the Soviet Union, and they got the ability to travel to the United States and to Western Europe and so forth, Fort Benning was inundated with visits from these former Soviet bloc countries. And they would come to Fort Benning, and the one thing that they wanted to know was, how do you make these non-commissioned officers and these young soldiers, what are you doing to train them? How do you train them? They felt pretty confident of their officer corps. They weren't particularly envious of our officer corps, but they were very, very envious of our non-commissioned officer corps and our young soldiers. And the real difference was that our soldiers, just as I mentioned before, they know not only what they're doing, but they know why they're doing it. Part of the American military was that the commander, when he gives an operations order, he gives a commander's intent. He tells them what they're going to do and why they're doing it. So, a common phrase in the military is the plan never survives the first bullet. So once the plan's in action, if things go awry, which they often do, soldiers who are armed with knowing not only what they were supposed to do, but why they were supposed to do it, can make decisions on their own. And that's what we empower our soldiers and our non-commissioned officers to do, that, to make decisions on their own. The Soviet bloc, we learned after the fall, that Soviet soldiers were told what to do, when to do, and do it, and then I'll come and tell you what else I want you to do. So you go take that hill, you put out a perimeter, and when you do that, I'll come tell you what I want you to do next. And that's how they thought soldiers should be led. Our soldiers, coming from the culture that we come from, were totally different. And the difference was actually a victory without a war, and that is the Cold War. I mean, the Cold War was literally won by standing face to face with the Soviet Union along the whole divide of Europe for 40 years with a much better army equipped with much better soldiers than the Soviet Union. So what I would, I guess, sum up to say is even though it's not obvious to the casual observer that the Army would be a place where you would say the pyramid is upended and somehow or another the commander's on the bottom and the soldiers are up here, in many respects it is. In some respects it's not, and in some respects it can't be. I mean, the boss still gets the opportunity to give a Article 15 or a court-martial if the soldiers misbehave. But it is imperative in the military that all of our soldiers at the level where they're meeting the enemy face to face, that they are well trained and well equipped, and they know that their leaders will be right there with them. And I think that is an example of at least many facets of the upending the pyramid. I like to also, and it's part of my parochialism though, when I go out and try to raise money for the Infantry Museum, you know, I'll go to a company like Lockheed Martin, and Lockheed Martin doesn't really make anything for the Army, or at least not much of any value, certainly not for the infantry. But I like to remind them, you know, that the cruise missiles they make, you know, and the fighter aircraft that they make, all those things ultimately support the soldier on the ground making contact with the enemy, and that's the infantryman. So, you know, a case can be made to say that the entire military really is in support of whether it's a Marine or an infantry soldier that is making contact with the enemy. They're there to make sure that soldier is successful. Okay, let me move to my second career, the corporate world. One of the things I'd just start out by saying is, you know, I think the information age, technology age, has turned the pyramid upside down all by itself. I mean, without much thought on that. I mean, think about this. And if you wanted to be, like when we were at the bank, if you wanted to be the president of the bank, you know, you might start out as a teller, and then you might become a customer service rep, and then maybe you would be assistant branch manager, and then you'd be a branch manager, and then you might be the, you know, the loan officer, get a little more experience, then you might be the vice president, you know, of operations and run a bunch of branches, and then maybe the vice president of loans, and then maybe the senior vice president of operations and run all the branches, and the executive vice president for risk management, and then eventually you become the president. You know, and if you're really, really good at that, you might do it in 20 years or more. Or after the information age, you might just invent PayPal at 29, you know, and all of a sudden, you know, you're a billionaire. I mean, the president of the bank makes good money, but he doesn't make $1 billion. And so, in many respects, this information technology age has turned the pyramid upside down already, apart from anything else that we might say. But it's a lot more comprehensive than that, though, because it came so fast that you had a lot of the curmudgeon leaders like me, you know, that were up here that didn't know technology, and you got a bunch of young people like some of you all that come in and you know everything about technology, and yet I'm still in charge, and yet you're the one that's here where the future is. And so there was a tremendous incentive in this case for the senior leaders to empower the workers, the workers being the smart kids that understood technology. I'm going to give you my own personal example. You know, when I did retire from the Army and I moved to the bank, I had a little project that I did for a little while, but within a few months I was given charge of the call center at Columbus Bank and Trust Company. And I didn't know anything about call centers. I didn't know anything about banking, really. Remember, I just wanted to stay in Columbus. I got a job, but I didn't know anything about the job. So I decided, well, the people that know about call centers are the customer service reps. So every Monday and every Friday, I would go over to 12th Street Deli and get a tray of pastries, and I would meet with about 6 or 8 of my customer service reps, and I would talk to them, and I ask them, you know, what did they need? What was their biggest challenges? You know, how do they think we could get better? And I did this until I talked to every customer service rep. Now, we only had about 50 customer service reps, so it didn't take me that long to go through it the first time around. And they told me some stuff. I mean, they needed training. At the time, we didn't have a training department. We thought the customer service rep, you give them a book of cut and paste sort of rules, and you sit them next to somebody else who was a customer service rep, and they'd listen on the phone for a week or two, and then you'd throw them into the pit. And so they said, no, we need a training department. So I talked to my boss, and he said, yeah, you can hire a trainer. So I went and hired a retired sergeant major. If you're ever in doubt about anything, just hire a sergeant major. I mean, I just hire a sergeant major, and you'll be good. And he created his own training department, and he just retired after 20 years at TSIS and did incredibly well. But he started a formalized training program for the customer service reps. But I found out a lot of other things. They had some complaints. They said, I come in, I try to do my job, and I'm sitting here and I'm taking my phone calls and so forth, and I can hear, Susie or Billy over here, and they've got some customer that's really nice, and they're just talking and talking and talking to them because they know the next customer might not be so nice. And so, they're talking to this guy for 5-10 minutes, and I'm taking 2 or 3 calls. One was the angry customer they should have got. So we said, well, let's figure this out together then. So we went to round 2. So I kept bringing the pastries over, and I talked to them. I said, okay, let's come up with some performance standards. How should we do this? So over the course of meeting with all 50 of them the second time, we decided that we would figure out what is the average amount of time that you talk on the phone for a call. And it was 3.5 minutes. So we created what we call this productivity calculator. And in another life, I actually taught math. So I like numbers and formulas and stuff like that. So I created this little productivity calculator. So if you talked on all your calls for the day, the week, or the month about the average of the calls, then you were 100% customer service rep on productivity. If you were a little bit quicker, you were 110% because you were a little faster. If you're a little slower, then you were 90%, something like that. And then we decided that we would share in this newfound efficiency. So we said we're going to get some pay for performance. So we decided we would pay people, if they met certain standards of productivity, and it seemed really good for a while. And then you realized that in some of the meetings they said, Susie's just hanging up on customers. Yeah, she's really fast, but that's because and I got the call back. I mean, she hung up on him, and the next thing I know, I got this customer who hung up on me, and I'm in there for 15 minutes. So we realized that there was an unintended consequence of the productivity calculator. So we created a quality department, and the quality department would mystery shop, if you randomly listen to calls and evaluate the calls, and they would do several calls for every customer service rep every period. And the customer service reps couldn't tell. It was seamless to them. They had no idea. So if they didn't pass the quality check, then they couldn't get their performance pay, even if their performance was good. So quality was number 1. And if they actually hung up on people, we'd fire them. So we thought we had corrected that problem. So now we had a productivity calculator, and we made sure that our calls were good. So we thought we were really good. And yet, as we grew, and we started growing by leaps and bounds. We started doing customer service calls for not all, but many of the TSIS clients. And we did so many that our whole group moved from CB&T over to TSIS. They just lock, stock, and barrel moved all of us. We started out with 50 customer service reps. By the time we moved, we had 300, and we eventually got to 750. But there is a cyclic pattern for calls, and you can pick it out. You can predict it, and so we would hire people to be there when the call volume was there. Monday morning, 8 o'clock, high calls. Thursday night at midnight, not so high. So we would staff people for these things. And after a while, I was watching that. I noticed that we had all these calls in queue, all these angry customers because it took them forever to get to us. And I thought, I know we've got enough customer service reps, and I started looking at the technology thing there, and I thought, well, how come we only got 10 people here? I thought we had 20 people. Well, it turns out that what happened is, we were growing really fast, so you were customer service today, and you're really good customer service rep, and so we made you a supervisor. And then you came to work at 8 o'clock because that's when we needed you. But you said, I'm not much of a morning person. So you went on and said, how about if I come in at 9? I'll still work 8 hours. I'll come in at 9 and I'll stay an extra hour. And you said, sure, yeah, that's 8 hours, that's fine. Well, what we found out is that bit by bit, some of our junior leaders were making independent decisions, and we didn't have the people that we had hired for the times we'd hired them for. So we bought a piece of software that was called schedule adherence. And so now when you checked in, it would give you a schedule adherence. It would tell us as a percentage of how close did you adhere to the actual schedule that we gave you. And we got a score on that. So it took us 3 times to sort of get to it, if you will. But after 3 iterations, all of which were input from well, the last one wasn't a lot of input from that was more empirical data, but the other 2 were input from the customer service reps. We created a fairly nice set of performance standards and quality standards and schedule adherence standards, and then we gave individual incentives and we gave team incentives, and we were able to do that because we were knocking the socks off of anything that we had ever done before. And when I first started there, we had 50 people, and we were what's known as a cost center. We didn't make any money because we were actually just answering phone calls for our own company, and our own company didn't pay us to do that. But by the time we moved over to TSIS and we started answering all these other calls, by the time I left 5 years later, we were a $60 million revenue generating company, and it was all because the folks that were there where the rubber met the road were doing great jobs. They had good quality, they were efficient, and they stuck to their schedules. And as a result of that, we got a really good reputation. Because we had a good reputation, we had more and more and more of TSIS's customers that wanted their calls to be handled by us. They found that it was actually cheaper, better for us to handle their calls than for them to try to do it at their own place. And we did a lot of other things to make sure that the CSRs knew that they were valued. How many of you all here remember Y2K? Okay, for those of you that don't remember Y2K, in 1999, computers were, I guess they were 20, 30 years old, but they always had 2 digits for the day, 2 digits for the month, and 2 digits for the year. And the conspiracy theory throughout the world was that on New Year's Eve on 2000, that 2-digit number for the year was going to screw up the entire world because you can subtract how long you've been in the Army. Well, 1999, 1993, 6 years. Well, if it's 2000, 00 to 1993, how long have you been in the Army? You've been in the Army. Oh my gosh, and so the thought was that the whole world was going to go to pot on New Year's Eve in 2000, and it wasn't just Columbus. It wasn't just our bank. I mean, the whole world was in this huge, for months, if not a couple years before Y2K, there was a frenzy of activity. So the call center, we were prepared for it. I mean, we wanted to make sure we had everybody in the company. And at midnight, we don't really normally get a lot of calls, but it's Y2K, So we had like 350 customer service reps there. We might have normally had 25. But what we told them is said, okay, it's New Year's Eve. All right, come dressed in your best, So most of my customer service reps were in high school last year. So they were in their prom dresses and their prom, whatever they wore at prom last year. But me and my boss, we were in our tuxedos and so forth. And we came to work. Well, Y2K comes sequentially, just in time zones. So when we saw sort of Uzbekistan handle it pretty well, we were more confident the United States was going to be okay. So before midnight even came, this was a non-starter. And there were like 5 calls at midnight. But what we had done is we'd asked them to all come in dressed for a New Year's Eve party. We had decorated the cafeteria like a New Year's Eve party, and we had the best New Year's Eve party all on the company. They're all getting paid, and everything was paid for them, and they had a really, really good time. And we would do all sorts of things like that to take care of our customer service reps. I mentioned to you that we were growing so fast that we would take him. He was a good customer service rep. He handled calls really, really well, and we made him a team leader, and now he had 10 customer service reps. And you know what? He didn't have any training for that. And just because he was good on the phone didn't mean he was good at handling your problem, good at disciplining you, and so forth. So what we realized was that we were going to continue to do this because we were growing that fast. So we would identify sort of our best customer service reps, and we would send them to a small, short course that we taught on the weekends. On Saturday and Sunday, the Sergeant Major that I talked about and I would teach what we referred to as sort of a primary leader development course. We would go in there and we would give them sort of the basics of what they might have to deal with if they got promoted to a team leader. And we would do that on Saturday and Sunday for a couple of weeks, and then surprisingly, almost all those young customer service reps eventually became team leaders. And it made them more equipped to handle their team, which then the teams benefited by it. We benefited by it, they benefited by it, but the team benefited by it. I mean, a customer service rep deserves to have a leader that has some leadership skills and talents and so forth. And so we were able to provide some talents and skills for our young leaders that were coming in. So I would tell you that my corporate world experience is probably more easily translatable into the academic stuff that I had looked at in these books, in terms of there's no doubt that in a call center the hierarchy's got to be upside down. Everybody in the call center has got to be supporting the people who are talking to your customers, because if your customers aren't happy, then you don't have customers. And so the technology folks have to be there. The people that run the voice response units have to be there. If the voice response unit breaks down, guess what? Every call comes to a customer service rep. And if you're only planning on 1 out of 4 calls coming to a customer service rep, and now 100% of them they get overwhelmed very quickly. So everybody's got to be in support of the customer service rep, because that's where your reputation is. That's where your business is. Okay, the last career I've had is the nonprofit world at the museum. So the challenges of a nonprofit world are that typically salaries are not great, and benefits are not great. Most nonprofits don't have a 401k, they don't have a pension plan, they don't have bonuses, they don't have stock options, they don't have any of the kinds of things that you might get in a corporate world. You'll be really lucky if there's some sort of health care that they're able to provide you. But the opportunities are that people who work at nonprofits work there because they're passionate about what the nonprofit is. People who work at PAWS, they're animal lovers, If you work at the Valley Rescue Mission, these are people who truly care about the homeless, If you work at Historic Columbus, you're into historic preservation. You want to preserve those historic buildings and traditions of our community. The Boys and Girls Club, these are people who are passionate about providing a caring place for kids to develop. House of Heroes, these are people that are passionate about veterans. They want to give veterans a leg up, and they want to pay back for some of the things that they've done. And I could go on and on and on. So at a nonprofit, by definition, profit is not the motive. You're there for a whole different reason. You're there to do whatever that nonprofit mission is. And because of that, the workers really are typically the ones that are closest to the job. Who do you think's closest to the pets at PAWS? It's the people that wash the pets, that take care of the pets, that feed the pets. They're the ones that are there, that are doing what the mission of PAWS is all about. And therefore, they're the ones that need to be taken care of. They're the ones that need to be consulted and empowered to be able to accomplish the mission. And usually nonprofits are a much flatter organization. A lot of times, you know, there's an executive director or a president or something like that, and almost everybody else reports to them if it's a small nonprofit, or even if it's not, there might be one layer between them, you know, and typically you have great access to the decision maker or to the executive, if you will, in a nonprofit. So let me just talk to you about our nonprofit, which is the Infantry Museum. Now, this is a world-class museum. How many of y'all have been to the Infantry Museum? Great. More than even know where Cooperstown is. All right. Well, you know, the museum back in 2011 received what amounts to the Oscars for museums. We went to a black tie dinner out in Hollywood, got the Themed Entertainment Awards, huge, big crystal award like this. And this is for the industry that has museums, Harry Potter Village, Disney World, the opening ceremony to the Beijing Olympics, you know, things like that, that are entertainment-oriented facilities or activities. And we were one of 3 museums worldwide to receive the Themed Entertainment Award for museums. One was the Disney Family Museum in Anaheim, California, and another one was a museum in Dublin, Ireland. It is a high-quality museum, and of course I'm biased about it, but I think that gives some credibility that it's not just me that thinks that. We had another writer from a magazine that came there, and when he left, he wrote this glowing article, and he referred to it. He says, "This is the Smithsonian of the Army." And that name has stuck with us. I mean, it stuck with us. We didn't create the name. We didn't dub ourselves the Smithsonian of the Army. But invariably, when we get people that come here from Washington, and because it's a military museum, we get a lot of generals that come from Washington. The Secretary of the Army has been here several times, Chief of Staff of the Army, Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. All those people come here, and every time they come here, the first thing they say is, "This needs to be in Washington." You know, this needs to be in Washington, and we remind them that the infantry school is at Fort Benning. But it is that quality of a facility. It's been written up in the Wall Street Journal, in the Atlanta Business Review, the Boston Globe, the Chicago Tribune. It's on the cover of Army Magazine. It's gotten lots and lots of press worldwide. But if I were to ask you, who owns the museum? Who owns the museum? I would tell you our volunteers own the museum. When you walk into the museum, you are greeted by a volunteer. If you have information or if you have a question, you go to the information desk and a volunteer tells you what to do. If you have a problem, you fall, you know, you're missing your daughter, your son, a volunteer helps you. If you go down to one of the galleries and you want to know something, there's a volunteer there that tells you. The volunteers will tell you things that are going on in the museum that you don't even know what's going on in the museum. And they are the face of the museum. They are, you know, nobody knows all the people that work upstairs in the offices. They don't know what we do, don't really care. They come to the museum for an experience. Now, the museum is an experience in and of itself. But when they leave, the people that they have interacted with, the face of the museum, are our volunteers. And so, you know, when you realize that, you say, okay, well, so what are we doing to empower our volunteers? Well, when we get a volunteer, and by the way, any of you all that want to, we can sign you up. But when we get a volunteer, we train them. First of all, we want to make sure that they are comfortable with whatever responsibility they volunteered to do. So we give them some training. We give them a special uniform. They have a blue shirt, a really nice blue shirt. We ask them to wear khaki pants or skirt or shorts if it's in the summertime. Actually, we don't let them wear shorts, but we khaki pants or skirts. But they love their uniform because they stand out and people know who they are. And we give them lots of thanks and praise. I mean, we make a point of going every day and telling them how much we appreciate them. We make a point of asking them, you know, what we can do for them. We have some specific appreciation events, and we about 4 times a year we'll have a volunteer appreciation reception. We'll have them invite their families, you know, and they get awards. You know, they got a volunteer pin, and they got the 500-hour, you know, ribbon, and they got the 1,000-hour ribbon, and so forth. And and they wear those things proudly. It's sort of like your marksmanship, you know, medals and so forth. And they're very proud of that. But I would tell you I think the single biggest thing that we do is we include them in everything. They are, in essence, part of our staff. So if we have a Christmas party, which we do, or a Halloween party, which we do, we always invite them. You know, they typically win the Halloween party. They come with these crazy, crazy costumes. And we make sure that they feel like they're every bit as much a part of the foundation as any paid member in the foundation. But truthfully, just because Dr. Phil asked me to do this, I've been doing a lot more walking around, and I'm finding out that I'm not doing enough because there's some things that they need that they don't have. Went and talked today to the information desk. So what do you all need? I said, we're not the information desk for the National Infantry Museum. We're the Welcome Center of South Columbus. She said, everybody calls here, and they want to know, where do I go to get a ticket for Whitewater? What's playing at the Springer? I mean, everything under the sun. And these great volunteers try to help them. They said, but we don't have a computer with internet. And so I'm sitting here on my phone trying to find, where do you get tickets for the Springer? And I'm going like, well, I just haven't asked enough questions here. And some other people haven't asked enough questions too. So it was important for me, and I told Dr. Phil this when I met him the other day, you never learn something like you learn it when you have to teach it. And I wouldn't certainly say that I've been teaching you, but just delving into this subject matter has caused me to realize there's some things that I need to do, that we need to do at the museum to support our workers who are our volunteers. That's our front line. So I'm told that I'm the only thing between the master's course here and them being done. They normally have an hour and a half afterwards. I know all the other folks here would go anyway. So, but I am more than happy to answer any questions that you have. Yes, sir.
So I'm looking at the website. It says free admission for 5 donations. Where do the donations go to? Why don't you just start $5?
The museum is free, and we have a lot of people who come in free. But what people don't realize is it's not a government facility. The museum was built entirely with funds that we raised at the foundation. We actually still owe $10 million on the museum. So when you have a free museum and you have debt, and we have about a $5 million budget, and by the way, we also rent the space to the Army for free. The Army does pay their fair share of their electricity and their housekeeping and so forth. So whatever percentage of the building belongs to the Army, they pay for their share of the utilities. So to answer your question, if we didn't ask for donations, then we would have a real hard time making ends meet. But we never turn anybody away. I mean, if you come in and maybe you've been there 10 times and you paid $5 a couple times, you said, I've been there, done that, just walk right on in. Yes?
Okay, so you've been in 3 career aspects. And which one of those would you think it's easier to motivate your followers, citizens to act? It seems to me that, from what you told me, maybe the volunteering career you had, you saw people like more passionate about what they did. Do you think that has something to do with being able to motivate them easier than?
Well, that's a good point, Sebastian. The volunteers are intrinsically motivated. They volunteered. Now, we volunteer in the Army too. All the people in the Army are volunteers too, but it's a little different kind of volunteering. I mean, the people, once they volunteer in the Army, they're not volunteers anymore. They're in the Army. The volunteers are pure volunteers. I mean, they can unvolunteer tomorrow if they want to. So they are intrinsically motivated to do stuff. But I would tell you, I used to consider, when I was at the call center, that I was still in the Army, because the kinds of things that make good leaders in the Army are the exact same kind of things that I thought of all my customer service reps as my troops. They need to have standards, they need to be held accountable, they need to be appreciated, and they need to be developed. And that's exactly, what I felt like we used to do in the Army. It's a little different with volunteers, because, the volunteers aren't there but for an hour. I mean, sometimes the volunteers are once a month. Sometimes they're there twice a week. You know, so it's not quite the same, but it's easy to motivate them because they're there because they want to be there.
So they expect nothing.
We give them popcorn. Yeah, some people work for peanuts, they work for popcorn.
In my case, I don't like popcorn. So.
Well, we work something out special. Yeah, no, it really is sort of cute. You see all the volunteers, and they leave the museum, they go by and they get their bag of popcorn. That's what we pay them. We pay them a bag of popcorn. Anybody got any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. Thanks, Dr. Phil.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate you being here, and we have a gift that we give our speakers. And I like to say that this is a gift that Danielle and I and Teal put together. This one.
Oh, thanks.
And this one is a gift that we just found in a closet somewhere. But we found that our speakers like them too. So.
Oh, great. Thanks.
So there you
Thank
go.
you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks, Dr. Phil. Thanks. Thanks.